In the last section, we added in some logic to the Express server that's going to get us a connection over to Postgres over here and create a new table inside the database if it doesn't already exist. We're now going to make sure that the Express server has a connection over to Redis, so anytime that a user submits a new number to the React application, the React app will push that index over to the Express server, and the Express server will then push that index into the running Redis instance. So back inside of my index.js file inside of the server directory, underneath all the Postgres stuff, I'll put on a new section that we'll call Redis Client Setup. So here we'll say const Redis is require Redis, and we're going to do some very similar create client calls that we did inside of the worker folder just a moment ago. We'll say const Redis client is redis.createClient. I'm going to pass this an object that's going to have a host coming from keys.redis host, a port from keys.redis port, and then finally we'll define a retry strategy. That's going to be an arrow function that always returns the number 1000 to say if we ever lose connection to Redis, try to reconnect to it once every 1 second. One thing I want to point out here is that the key for retry strategy is separated by a underscore right there, as opposed to the JavaScript standard of camel case like so. So make sure that you've got underscore strategy, and strategy should have a lowercase s. And then very similar to what we did before, where we created a duplicate connection, I'm going to also make a Redis publisher. I'm going to use a more descriptive name this time around than when we created that duplicate copy of the Redis client over inside of the worker index.js file, just because we have many more variables inside of this server file. So I'll say const Redis publisher will be Redis client dot duplicate. Now, in case you're curious, we are making these duplicate connections in both files because according to the Redis documentation for this JavaScript library, if we ever have a client that's listening or publishing information on Redis, we have to make a duplicate connection, because when a connection is turned into a connection that's going to listen or subscribe or publish information, it cannot be used for other purposes. So that's why we're doing this duplicate thing in both locations. All right, so that's pretty much it for the initial setup here. Now we're going to start to define some of the different routes that our server is going to eventually respond to. So down here, we'll put down another section and we'll say express route handlers. I'm going to first make a test route, something that we can use to make sure that our application is working the way we expect. I'll say app.get /. This thing is going to be called with a request and response. Anytime someone makes a request to the root route of our Express application, I'm going to send back a response of hi, like so. We'll then define another route handler at the route values /all. This route handler is going to be used to query our running Postgres instance and retrieve all of the different values that have ever been submitted to Postgres. So this is essentially going to return all of the values that have ever been submitted to our application, or all the indices that have been submitted. This is going to be an async arrow function. So don't forget the async keyword right there. We'll do request and response. And then inside of here, we're going to make a query to the Postgres instance by saying const values is await e.g. client.query. And the query we're going to issue is going to be a SQL query. We'll say select star from values. So essentially, look at the values table that we created a little bit ago and pull all the information out of it, and then we're going to send all that information back to whoever is making a request to this route. So I'll say res.send values.rows. The .rows right here is going to make sure that we only send back the actual information that we retrieve from the database and no other information that is contained inside this values object. The other information that's in here is some information about the query itself, like say how long it took or what tables we touched or stuff like that. So we're just going to send back the relevant information to whoever made a request to this route handler. Next up, we're going to add another GET request handler to values/current. This is going to be another async function, so don't forget the async keyword. We'll do recres And inside of here, we're going to reach into Redis this time. So reach into Redis, and we're going to retrieve all of the different values, all the different indices and calculated values that have ever been submitted to our backend. So find all the all the indices that have been requested from our users, and return all the accompanying values that have been calculated for each one. So inside of here, I'll look at Redis client hget all, which essentially means look at a hash value inside the Redis instance and just get all the information from it. The hash that we're going to look at is called values. We're going to pass in a callback function that has error and values. Inside this thing, we're just going to send back res.send values. Now, quick note here, you'll notice that up here we're making use of the await or async await syntax, and down here we're doing a very classic callback for our asynchronous route data handling. Unfortunately, the Redis library for Node.js doesn't have out-of-the-box promise support, which is why we have to use callbacks as opposed to making use of the nice async await syntax. Just a quick side note there. All right, so I know this is a long section, but we just need to do one more route handler down here. So let's just get that done with. So the last route handler that we're going to define is going to receive new values from the React application. So anytime that a user puts a new index in here, like say 7, and then clicks on submit, they're going to try to post that information to our backend. So from the React application to the Express server, that's the route handler that we're going to define right now. Last route handler. So I'll say app.post, because this time we're going to be listening for a post request. And I want to watch for a post request to the values endpoint. We'll then put in an async callback, so rec.res. And then inside of here, we're going to first get the index that the user just submitted from rec.body.value, index. So look at the index that the user just submitted from rec.body.index. We're then going to make sure that the index that was submitted is less than 40. So if a user puts in a number or an index that's really high, calculating a Fibonacci number with the method that we've put together inside of our worker process for a very large index will take a very, very, very long time, like on the order of years or decades or centuries. So we're just going to arbitrarily cap the size of the index that the user submit to make sure that our worker process does not just get arbitrarily forever locked down for all time. So I'll say if parse int of index is greater than 40, then we're going to immediately return and send back a status of 422 and send the message value or index to high, like so. So now that we've got this index, or the number that we're going to use to calculate a Fibonacci value, we're going to first take that value and we're going to put it into our Redis data store. So I'll say Redis client.hset values. We'll put in the index, and then as the value for that index, we're going to put in nothing yet. So eventually, the worker is going to come to the hash, or kind of data structure that we're creating inside of Redis, and it's going to replace this nothing yet string with the actual calculated value. So nothing yet essentially means we've not yet calculated a Fibonacci value for this particular index. After we put the value in there, we'll look at the Redis publisher, and we'll publish a new insert event of that index. So this right here is going to be the message that gets sent over to that worker process. It's going to wake up the worker process and say, hey, it's time to pull a new value out of Redis and start calculating the Fibonacci value for it. And then after doing both those steps, we're also going to look at our Postgres client, and we're going to add in the new index that was just submitted. So remember, the Postgres database is going to be storing this kind of permanent record right here. It's going to be storing the permanent record of all the different indices that have ever been submitted to our application. So we'll say pgclient.query insert into values. We are inserting a value for the number column. So I'm going to say number, and then values $1, like so. I'll then put in a comma, an array, and I'll list out the index that was submitted to our application for that. So this line right here is going to take the submitted index and permanently store it inside of Postgres. And then finally, as a response at the very end, I'll say res.send, and we'll just send back some arbitrary response like working true to say, all right, we are doing some work to calculate your Fibonacci value. So now as the very last step, inside of the index.js file, we're going to set up app.listen, and we're going to listen to port 5000 inside of here. And we'll set up a callback, and we'll just say something like console log listening, like so. All right, so I know that's a lot of typing, but that's all we have to do for the index.js file inside of our Express folder. So again, we're going to try executing this file at the command line. Now the file's not going to work as it stands right now because we do not have a running Redis server or a running Postgres server, but it's going to at least allow you to determine whether or not you have a typo inside this file. So I'm back inside of the complex directory, which we call as the root folder for our entire project. I'm going to change into the server directory, and then inside of here I will run node index.js. Now you want to see a message of something like cannot find module express. If you see anything else, that means that you have a typo somewhere, either inside of the index.js file or inside of the keys.js file. So you'll want to look at both these files and try to find the typo. Now, if you can't find the typo, that's totally fine. Remember, I'm going to post all of the correct code that we're writing right now in like 1 or 2 or 3 more videos. So if you see an issue, don't sweat it. You don't have to stare at your code all day. You can always just open up my copy of this project and copy paste everything from my index.js file into your index.js file. Okay, so let's take a quick pause right here. In the next section, I think that we've got just like a tiny bit more. Actually, you know what? I think that might be it. Oh, we got to do the React application, of course. How could I forget? All right, so quick pause, come back in just a second, and we'll put the React app together. So I'll see you in just a bit.